Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. A couple housekeeping items. As you know, or should know by now, if you have questions, you can type them in on the right-hand side of your screen under the questions section, and we will be happy to answer those at the end of the webinar. Also, you were instructed to put in the names of anyone sitting in upon registering for this webinar, so you should be all set and no need to send us a participant list. Please allow 7 to 10 days to get the credit uploaded to your portal, and you will also be sent something in the mail. At this time, I'd like to welcome our presenter, David Roberts. David is a licensed social worker. He is also an adjunct professor at Utica College, and he specializes in healing and bereavement. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Kelly. It's great to be with you, and it's great to be with the rest of the funeral directors today. I'm happy to be here. So I guess we can get started. What I'm going to do is, as Kelly mentioned, you can type any questions you have during my presentation into chat mode, and then we will reserve about 10 minutes after 10 minutes after my presentation for questions. So my presentation will be approximately 50 minutes, and then we'll do the remainder of the 10-minute times at 10 minutes that we have for questions. So before we get going into the actual presentation called Helping Parents and Families After the Death of a Child, I just want to give you some brief background in addition to what Kelly had mentioned. I am a licensed master social worker. I had for 27 years been an addiction professional for the state of New York at the McPike Addictions Treatment Center in Utica, New York. I retired in 2012 in July after 30 years of service and embarked on a career in teaching. I'd actually been an adjunct professor at Utica College since 2003. And then after I retired, I embraced teaching pretty much on a part-time, full-time basis. One of the courses I teach is death, dying, and bereavement, and how I got interested or involved with the field of death, dying, and bereavement was through my own personal tragedies. The one in particular that got me interested into this field and helped me embark on a life of service and meaning was the death of my daughter Janine, who died on March 1st, 2003 of a very rare form of cancer, and she was 18 years old. So this presentation is going to come from the perspective not only of any professional background that I've had as a therapist or a counselor, but my personal experience, with the death of an adult child. So that's the lens that I will be presenting this through today. There isn't anything in the last 18 years that I haven't explored related to grief or loss. So I'm open to any questions that you may have, either either after this presentation or during the presentation. My contact information is up on the first slide. My personal website is bootsyandangel.com, and my personal email address is bootsyandangel@gmail.com. I respond very quickly to emails, and I'm always willing to entertain any questions from anybody after any of the funeral directors and anybody else who sits in on my presentations, after we're done. So that's my background in a nutshell. So let's get on with the actual presentation in terms of helping parents and families after the death of a child. First, so I want to see if we can see how we do the slideshow. We're going to play from Kern's play from here. Okay, there we go. All right. Experiences that are common to child loss. This is something I got and adapted from a book that I had read about 3 years, I believe, after my daughter's passing. And it was a book by Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun called Helping Bereaved Parents, a Clinician's Guide. Tedeschi and Calhoun were not themselves bereaved parents, but they did a lot of work with parents who had experienced the death of a child, and they really, really got the experience of a bereaved parent, and they really encapsulated it very accurately in their book. So we're just going to go through some of the experiences common to child loss. One is shock and disorientation. Now, the shock doesn't only come from the death itself, but it's due to the fact that the parents' assumptions about the world as they knew it are shattered. We as parents have experienced a loss that defies the natural order of the universe. We are not expected to bury our children. We don't come into this life as parents expected to bury our children, but in reality, many of us do. And so we look at the fact that we are dealing with a loss that's unnatural, defies the natural order of the universe, and is something that causes us to reevaluate our values, reevaluate our beliefs about the world and how it operates. Disconnectedness from the world. Okay, this is, and I can explain this from my own personal experience shortly, and I can also, this also represents other parents that I have companioned as, over the last, 10 plus years. I've had parents describe to me that they'll go into a grocery store, for example, and they'll see everybody's world just continuing. People are shopping, they're laughing while their world is stopped because of the death of a child. So they feel disconnected from the world as they know it because the world now has changed because their child has died. The other part is that they may also feel disconnected from themselves. We go within and try to figure out what kind of world do we want to live in and the type of person that we want to be. That can cause self-imposed kind of alienation where we will stay away from individuals who were once our friends, or particularly friends who have their families intact, and and have not lost a child. So that type of disconnectedness is something that that needs to be negotiated, and takes time to reestablish a connection in a world without the physical presence of our children. Deep emotional pain. Metaphorically, and you'll hear this a lot in early grief, the deep emotional pain may be expressed metaphorically. A parent may say to you, and I'm say to you that, it feels like when my child died, that part of my arm or leg was amputated, or a piece of my heart was ripped out and just, thrown on the floor and stamped out. So they will explain that very deep emotional pain, particularly in the early years, and you will see, particularly as an individual comes up to significant milestone dates, which could be, the death anniversary, or as I like to refer to it, angelversary date, or birthdays. The emotional pain can intensify in the days leading up to the actual milestone date. And when the milestone date occurs, the pain may be less, or less than anticipated, but in the days leading up to it, it truly is. Loss of daily functioning. This is particularly in early grief. Physically, individuals will complain of extreme fatigue, inability to sleep. They may, because of the stress of grief, their immune systems may be so compromised that they're more susceptible to illness, they're more susceptible to colds, they're more susceptible to flu. Other things that may happen from a cognitive standpoint, they become more forgetful. We become, difficulty concentrating. And also, many individuals and parents, and myself included, will replay over and over and over the last day of their child's life. And I think you particularly will see this in the case of terminal illness, as in the case with my daughter and any other parents whose children have died from cancer. You will see them replaying that day over and over and over again. And there's nothing abnormal or pathological about us doing that. What it boils down to is us trying to wrap our head around what happened and trying to make sense out of what happened, which is why we replay that over and over. I've discovered for myself as I've gotten more years behind me in grief that I replay the last day of my daughter's death less and less. It's a circular process, which means it never quite goes away. One of the existing theories that are in the death and dying field was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, where she talked about denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. She had developed this initially to give individuals who are at their end of life a vocabulary for their end of life journey. But many in our society took her stages and tried to apply it to the way that individuals grieve. And grieving does not occur in a very linear or predictable process. Tons of research have been done on the stages of grief, and time again, research supports the fact that we don't grieve in stages. But in reality, grief is a very circular process, which means the raw pain of grief can resurface at any time, no matter how much time has passed, depending on what's going on in that particular moment with that individual. So we can revisit that anytime. The difference is that in later grief, particularly if the individual is finding ways to move through grief and find renewed meaning and purpose in a world that has permanently changed because their child has died. The grief becomes softer, but it never really quite goes away. So in this case, the grief experience or grieving can occur over a lifetime. And it's just not with child loss. It could be with any loss that defies the natural order of the universe. It could be a young widow or widower who's died. And you have individuals who've been married for 56, 60 years, and one of them dies. If you're spending 3/4 of your life with somebody, that's going to also wreak havoc on your assumptions about how the world operates. Continuing connections to the child. This is a common theme among bereaved parents, and as we're finding out with other individuals who have experienced loss, and shouldn't be viewed as an abnormal part of the grief cycle. The ability to keep the child alive is a key part of parents fully integrating their loss into their changed lifestyle. And also the bereaved parent or parent who's experienced the death of a child will always view their child as their child no matter where they are. So their ability to stay connected, to continue to honor their child in their heart and through specific activities will allow them to continue their relationship with their child while moving through grief. So they will move through grief through remembering as opposed to simply forgetting or moving on. And one of the things that is not my vocabulary anymore is moving on from grief. It's usually now moving through grief. And I don't, use terms like, you'll get over it. You'll get through it, or you'll begin to accept the fact that your life has changed while in the process, continuing to keep your child alive in your heart and through any service activities or that you choose to do. Growth and sadness learn to coexist. I have learned over the years that I've had many moments of joy along with many moments of sadness and yearning, for the physical presence of my daughter. But essentially, growth doesn't occur as a result of death. It occurs due to the challenges that we've experienced and how we develop resiliency after loss. So essentially, from my experience and the experience of other parents, there's still going to be moments of sadness amidst the growth, but it is a normal process. It is a normal process because, again, as I mentioned, with these particular types of losses, grieving tends to be lifelong, but manageable as the years wear in. Okay. The accepted framework for supporting bereaved parents and families is something called expert companionship. Expert companionship downplays clinical expertise. It doesn't matter if I'm an LMSW, a PhD, or my credentials at this point are kind of irrelevant. I mean, it's helpful, but it's irrelevant with the model of companionship. This again was developed by Lawrence Calhoun and Richard Tedeschi and is found in their book, Helping Bereaved Parents. What it requires is the ability for you to be present for parents and their families, to bear witness to stories about their children, and to understand the child through the parents' and families' eyes. What parents are going to want more than anything is for their child to be remembered. The biggest fear that we have is that our child is going to be forgotten. And so one of the things that you will see parents do is they will talk about their children. They will want to share stories. They will want to share memories. And our job is to be present for that. And I have been witness to many parents' stories over the years, and many have very tragic circumstances. But beyond the tragic circumstances of their death are the lives of children that have been impactful, that have made a difference, that are, you just get to understand who those children are through the parents' eyes. And I always feel gifted with every story that I receive, because if somebody is willing to tell you the story of their child who has died, they trust you with those most intimate details. And I always look at that as a gift. Is it draining? Yeah, at times it can be draining, but it's worth it. It's worth it to be there at their most vulnerable moments. It also requires the willingness of the helper to be there for the long haul. And it's just, understanding that the grief journey and the path is an ongoing process, and it's one of ongoing learning and growth amidst the sadness that we experience. But expert, and again, one of the things I was telling Kelly before we went live with the presentation, I've been involved. I've done some presentations in Oneida County locally for the Tri-County Funeral Directors Association, and I've told the funeral directors there, and I will tell that, and this applies to all of you, that you do such a wonderful job with families, particularly getting them through the crisis. You see families at their worst, and you get those families in a position where at least we as helpers, human service professionals, can begin to work with them. And sometimes I think that gets overlooked. But I tell my students at Utica College, I said, if there's a Funeral Directors Association in your area, become acquainted with what the funeral directors do. Become acquainted with how they work with families, and you'll value the importance of their presence, as it relates to working with families. Okay. Ways to promote expert companionship. I know one of the things that is a staple now in any celebration of life or memory boards, whether it's a digital memory board or just a poster board memory board. I love photos. Whenever I'm working with a parent, I will ask for a photo of a child, or if they have a DVD sharing some of their most memorable moments of their children, particularly as they were growing up. In the case of an adult child, I will ask for them. If the parents don't want to look at those photos or DVDs with me, what I'll do is I'll ask if I can look at them anyway, and with their permission, and then share what I saw, through those photos and DVDs. But that's the first thing that I will I will ask for is particularly a photo. Any creative pieces like music, they may, parents may connect to music that their child enjoyed or that he or she or their child enjoyed. Drawings or poetry, anything that can get them in touch with their feelings in the moment. And linking objects, these are things that when we look at, bring up very vivid memories of our deceased children. There was one individual who did a bereavement support group at hospice, and what she had said is that she said we did a photo night, or if they didn't want to bring in a photo, they could bring an object or a linking object that reminded them of the memories they had of their loved ones. And she said as long as they could fit it through the door, it was all good. And one of the linking objects that a widow brought in with her was a pasta machine, a pasta making machine. And the reason she brought that in is that her and her husband would make pasta together. They would talk about family issues. They would bond over that. So she brought in the pasta maker. And I don't know if she made any pasta or not, but she did bring the pasta machine in. So linking objects or any type of objects, could be a photo, an object, either big or small, that brings up very vivid memories of that parent's child. And through those linking objects, as well as their stories, their children now become alive through those objects. Okay. Again, I'm on a Tedeschi and Calhoun trip. This is post-traumatic growth, which was also developed by Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun. Post-traumatic growth, very simply, is the positive change that occurs with parents and families as a result of the challenges presented by the death of a child. And there's no set time frame for this to occur. It will take as long as it will take. Now, some bereavement facilitators that I have talked to have indicated that they have read or come across research that indicates that the average length of time that it takes for a parent to adjust to the fact and accept the fact that their child is no longer a part of their physical world is about 3 to 5 years. But keep in mind that acceptance doesn't mean that they've gotten over it. It just means that they are resigned to the fact that this is going to be their life moving forward. But everybody's different, and I don't really like to really subscribe to those specific time frames because everybody's different. Depending on the quality of support, depending on their previous history of working through loss, that time frame could be shorter. It could be longer, but as long as an individual is making an effort and is to move through grief and to not be stuck in grief and to try to embrace some different perspectives that may help them work through their loss. Time is a relative. Time is a relative. Okay. This is how post-traumatic growth occurs. It occurs in 3 basic areas. There are changed relationships with others, changed sense of self, and a changed philosophy of life. Now, post-traumatic growth can occur in one of these areas. It could occur in all of these areas. It doesn't necessarily have to occur in all 3 areas for post-traumatic growth to be evident. With changed relationships with others, a consistent finding in the research on post-traumatic growth is that trauma strengthens relationships. Okay. The positive change is reflected in things like increased intimacy, closeness, and self-disclosure. Also, there's a different look in relationships because one of the things I have mentioned to parents and mentioned to other individuals who have lost loved ones is that your relationship circle is going to look different, partially because the people that we thought were going to step up didn't step up during our times of crisis, and the ones that we thought weren't going to step up did. Plus, depending on how grief is evolving, their support circle may reflect different individuals who have different views on spirituality and grief, that together that will help them, and that will empower them to embrace a perspective that will allow them to work through and in many cases find peace, many moments of peace, after the passing of their children. The other thing that you may have heard is that that when a child dies, it means that parents automatically end up in divorce court, or that marriages will break up routinely after the death of a child. I've never been one to literally buy into a lot of statistics, and with my background in psychology and science, I've seen, viewed a lot of statistics that try to equate cause and effect, with certain things that are going on in our world. But my belief is that if a marriage was not on solid ground to begin with, that if there wasn't a basis for intimacy, communication, love, if that foundation wasn't there, the death of a child is just simply going to be the final straw to break that. So looking, I would say, if you see those statistics, look at those kind of with a critical eye, and ask I think in most cases, marriages that weren't strong to begin with will be in danger of dissolving after the death of a child. A changed sense of self, and this also goes with the changed philosophy of life. The changed sense of self comes from the person's ability or the parent's ability to handle the aftermath of the crisis, which results in them becoming more self-reliant and resilient. And that's the other thing that, and I can attest to that from personal experience, and any individual that I've ever talked to who has been able to navigate tragedy has been able to develop that sense of resiliency and become more self-reliant. Change philosophy of life. Basically, this means a change in priority. This could be expressed or manifested in an increased appreciation for everyday life. Every morning, my cat, Zoe, who is now 13, and I would get up in the morning, she'll sit in my lap, and then I'll just tell her, I said, Zoe, we need to thank God, we need to thank the Creator, we need to thank our universe for giving us another day yesterday and allowing us to wake up today. Because as we get older, as I get older, I'm appreciative for each day that I have. And that's something, given the circumstances that I and my family have been through, and I know other parents have been through, I appreciate those days even more. The fact that I do get a chance to get another day. Change in priorities. Things like promotions and accumulation of things or wealth are no longer important. We measure abundance differently. We may measure abundance by the quality of relationships we have in our lives. We may just measure abundance by our ability to after we pay our bills, that, we have enough to live comfortably. Family will play a greater role in our daily lives. We become more interested in the fate of our fellow humans. Things that were once stressful are no longer make any difference. I remember when I was at work, and when I'd gone back to work, when my daughter's illness was, when she was having a recuperative period, and where she had her energy and she was feeling better after chemo, and I went to work. Somebody was complaining about having X number of clients that they were responsible for. And I remember telling somebody, I said, look, I'll take all their clients, I'll take all their groups. I said, just let them walk in my shoes for one day, and then have them come back and tell me how bad they have it. So things like that used to bother me before when I was working were no longer even significant. It wasn't even a blip in my radar. Um, so I mean, and usually with what I see mostly with post-traumatic growth is that change philosophy where things that once mattered don't matter anymore. And what we're more concerned with is the quality of our relationships, being a compassionate presence for others who have experienced tragedy. And we measure our richness in terms of the quality of relationships and just the quality of the people that are in our lives, among other things. Okay. I want to get into the circumstances of loss. One of the things that I used to to be the chapter leader for our local Compassionate Friends of the Mohawk Valley. The Compassionate Friends, and we'll get to this in our resources, is a national organization whose mission is to support families who have experienced the death of a child. They do that through through support group meetings that are usually held monthly, and those support group meetings are open to parents, siblings, and grandparents. Um, and whenever I have said to parents, and it's just regardless of cause of death, regardless of age, it does not matter. And one of the things that I've tried to impress in the years as a chapter leader is that though there are specific issues and things that we need to be aware of that make each unique parent's challenge different, what we all have in common is that we are now trying to pick up the pieces of our lives after experiencing the most unnatural of losses and experiencing the unthinkable. So I want to get into just some basic circumstances of loss that may be helpful as you're working with families down the road. So one is suicide, and suicide, as you know, um, tends to fall into that category of stigmatized loss, along with loss due to complications of addiction. Um, and there are sources of guilt that parents will experience. One is their feelings of failure as their role as protectors of their children. And this is a common theme that I think permeates any cause of death. In my case, with my daughter had a disease that was incurable. It was something that was beyond my control. Yet I felt like a failure for at least 2.5 years after she died because I thought I should have done more to be more aware, to be more cognizant of her symptoms. Um, I should have done more to protect her because as her father, that was my role, was to protect her from harm. And even for a disease that was incurable and beyond my control, I still felt that I had some control of that. And again, that is kind of one of the other impacts of grief that it had for me is that um, it took me 2.5 years to figure out that I did the best that I could, that I could not have done anything more to prevent this. There may be feelings that they have contributed to their child's despair. A lot of times what may happen, and I've had parents tell me this, that they have been questioned in terms of, well, didn't you see, did you see it coming, or were you aware of the signs? Or even one parent was asked specifically if they thought that they did something to contribute to that, which are the worst questions you can ask to a parent who's lost a child due to suicide. That's the worst you can ask anybody. And they will also ruminate and despair over actions that they could have taken to prevent the child's death. But in reality, individuals will attempt suicide when they feel hopeless, when they feel that there's no other alternative to their problems, and it's usually more than one factor that will contribute to an individual making the decision to take their lives. One of the things that we don't do with suicide anymore is we don't say committed suicide. We say either died by suicide or completed, because one of the things that had occurred, or one of the things that committed tends to bring up, is that suicide implies that suicide is a crime or committing a crime. So we basically have softened the language to say died by suicide or completed suicide. These are individuals that may feel more of a lack of connectedness because of the way that their child died. And they may, in most cases, they will. I've had parents who have not put the exact cause of death in their children's obituaries. Let's just say died suddenly or died unexpectedly because of that stigma and scrutiny. Homicide, you're going to get very similar types of issues that you will get with parents whose children have died by suicide, except there's a couple of different things. One are strong feelings of anger, rage, and revenge towards the perpetrator of the crime. I remember working with one parent years ago, as a father, whose daughter was killed by her boyfriend, who had emotional health issues and was killed, because of multiple stab wounds. And he told me, he said when he saw him at trial, his thought was to get a gun and kill him, and which was a total. And I know the guy's not. He does not have any history of violent behavior, but because of the pain of from his daughter's death, and I would also guess that because of the pain that he felt that he didn't do enough to protect her, that came out in rage towards. But he looked at me. He said, "I'd never do it." He said, "But I thought about it." Okay, so that's also a normal reaction. If the murderer has not been caught, the parent's own sense of safety is going to be threatened. And again, as I mentioned, the feelings of guilt, isolation, disconnectedness, very similar issues that an individual with the parent whose child has died by suicide will experience. Accidents, among 15 to 24-year-olds, I believe it's like 144,000 individuals in that age category die every year from accidents. That is, at that time, was the #1 cause of death in young people in the United States. The thing with accidents, as with any sudden death, the parent may not feel a sense of closure, not closure to the life, but just closure to things that should have been said, that they felt should have been said, that weren't said. Many times parents will say, "I wish I had told my child to buckle up," or "I wish I had told them that I had loved them one more time." Also, if the last words that a parent and child had were words of anger and they didn't have a chance to reconcile, those are issues that will be brought up. The other thing that also parents will want to know is, did their child suffer? And one of the things that they will want to do is to talk to the EMT who was on the scene and get that type of information so they could put some type of closure to the actual event. Again, not the actual life, but the actual event. And I always suggest to a parent, if they want to do that, take somebody that they trust with them for support. But that is something they're going to want to recreate. They're going to want to reconstruct what had happened. And they're also going to want to know that their child wasn't alone, and that they didn't suffer. And one of the things I would encourage is to allow them to do that when they are ready to do that. Sudden death, heart attack, stroke. Again, you're looking at the same issues that you would with accidents that parents will deal with. With miscarriages, newborn death, or SIDS, this tends to can fall into the category at times, depending on the response that parents get. They can fall into the aspect to the category of disenfranchised grief. And disenfranchised grief are individuals that are grieving but don't feel that they have the right to express it for a variety of different reasons. With miscarriages, individuals may see a miscarriage or a newborn death as a lost pregnancy rather than as the death of a child. One of the things I can, I can just recall discussions I've had with my wife, because we, with when she was pregnant with our 3 children. So the minute I found out I was pregnant, I became a mother. And but a lot of times individual mothers who have experienced miscarriage or newborn death loss may hear that, well, you could have another child, which may not be the case. There may be infertility issues afterwards, or they may have tried to conceive their first child at an older age, and so there may not be that opportunity. So basically, what we need to be able to do is to validate and support the fact that yes, this is as significant as any other, as an adult child loss, as any adult child loss, or a younger child loss that is just as significant and falls in that category. And also, if we can find a support group for them that has other parents that have had similar losses due to miscarriage or newborn death. I know Project Share is one that does a lot of work with that throughout the state and country. There may also be, hospices in your area or other bereavement support centers in your area that may have those type of support groups as well too. All right. I think I got 5 minutes. Am I correct? I don't know if Kelly, you can hear me. I got about 5 minutes. Am I correct? Before we get into questions?
Yes, that would be, 5 or 6 minutes. You'll be good.
5 or 6. Yeah, I can wrap this up in 5 or 6. And if I, for some reason, keep going, just pull the hook. Just let me know I need to stop. But I'll make sure I get this done in 6. Parents with surviving children, a lot of times surviving children, because the parents, and I can speak from my own personal experience, are so self-consumed and with the grief of losing one of their children, that sometimes we are not in a position to meet the needs of our surviving children. But what I tell parents is that previous parenting skills that you've developed, particularly during times of crisis, are always helpful, and rely on those strengths to help your children cope. The other thing to understand with surviving children is that children's grief will recapitulate over time. The meaning of death for a child at 5 years old is going to be much different than at 10 years old. So as they grow developmentally, their meaning of death is going to grow. And, their experience of grief is going to be different based on the developmental stages that they're in. I encourage parents to try to find other sources of support for their surviving children. It may be hospice groups that cater to younger children. If there are older siblings, they may want to hang out with their friends or a sibling support group. Sibling grief, and I'll just mention this very briefly in the 6 minutes. This is something that can also fall into the category of disenfranchised grief, because many times individuals are concerned with the well-being of the parents that we forget to check in on the siblings, where the siblings are told you have to be good for your parents. You have to, you have to, and so essentially the message they get is you have to put your own grief on hold to take care of everybody else. And one of the things that we need to realize with siblings is that they had a very sacred relationship with their brother and sister. I mean, if you guys have siblings, you can probably remember things you told your siblings that you'd never tell your parents. And that also has to be honored when you're working with families, is to check in with the siblings as well and tend to their grief as well. Okay. Parents with no surviving children, there's an organization called Alive Alone that I'd highly recommend. That I put the link into the PowerPoint, and I also sent a PDF version of the PowerPoint to Kelly for anybody who may want this after. They will question whether they're still a mother or a father, and you understand that families with children and grandchildren may trigger their grief, because if their only child or any of their surviving children did not have an opportunity to be in relationships where they had their own children, that's also going to be a trigger as well too. But Alive Alone is a great resource for parents with no surviving children, or have lost their only children, or have had multiple child loss where they have no surviving children. Okay. Again, just quickly, establish yourself as a listener. For those working with families, understand that everyone doesn't grieve in the same way, they grieve differently, and to kind of respect and understand that and work from that perspective. There's no set time frame from getting from the raw pain of grief uh, to um, to a point where you you commit to re-engage in life again, and validate any occurrences of unusual phenomenon or communication between parent, families, and child. This would be another seminar, but many parents, many um, individuals will say, I think I got a sign from my loved one. If you want more information on what signs are and how they manifest, two books, Hello from Heaven by Bill and Judy Guggenheim, and also Visions of the Bereaved by Kay Whitmer Woods. These are two older books that you can find cheaply on Amazon that will give you all the information you need with that. But for time's sake, I'm going to skip ahead so we can take questions. Talking to children about death, um, don't misrepresent the facts. Be very clear in your communication. Be honest in your communication. Don't tell a young child that, their grandfather has gone to sleep, because essentially what will happen is they're going to ask, well, when's he going to wake up, or has gone away? They're going to ask, well, when is he coming back? Give the children the opportunity to decide how much of the funeral they want to plan and they want to be involved in, or whether or not they want to attend the funeral. Okay. So those are just some of the things. Encourage their unique expression of feelings. It could be artwork, play therapy, music, or play activities. There are good age-appropriate books that speaks to how to deal with the child's sense of loss after death. You may want to consider recommending professional counseling if surviving children are at special risk. Well, special risk can include the death of both parents, the death of a sibling, and the death of a parent or sibling because of suicide. Okay? And let them know that it is okay to express emotions. With parents, what I'll tell them is, say, look, regardless of where you're at, especially if we're talking about child loss, always let your children know that it's okay for them to talk with you, no matter how you're feeling, that they can share memories of their brother or sister. Create that open level of communication, that open atmosphere of communication where they can come and talk with you at any time. Okay. Last slide is support group resources. There are two that I can recommend, and there may be others in your area, and this is specific to child loss. The Compassionate Friends of the USA, which has over 600 chapters in the United States. And there's their website. They also have virtual support group meetings for grandparents and siblings. If you want to find a chapter meeting in your area, there's a chapter locator. You can just type in your zip code and it'll give you meetings that are within any radius that you specify. And finally, the Bereaved Parents of the USA, which is very similar in scope to the Compassionate Friends, but a smaller organization. Their national conferences draw like no more, at the most 300 parents, grandparents, and siblings. The Compassionate Friends have been anywhere from up to 1,200 to 1,600. So you're talking about the Bereaved Parents as being a little bit smaller and a little bit more intimate. And I think we can stop showing the screen. If I hit stop showing screen, we're good, right, Kelly?
Yeah, you can stop showing the screen if you'd like, or you can just leave it right up there.
Okay. Well, I just stopped it, so
Okay.
well, I'll just say I'll put it back up there. So we're done. So I'm ready to take any questions that came in, if there's any.
Great. So thank you so much, Dave. At this time, if you have questions for Dave, please type them in the question box on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll just give it a moment and wait to see if any questions come.
Sounds good.
Okay, at this time, there are no questions. So, but there
Okay.
are several thank yous. So I just want to take a moment to thank you, Dave, for a wonderful presentation. And we're so glad that you were able to share that information with us. Um, there's one comment, Dave, I found the most important thing to do is make sure you talk to the parents alone.
Yep. Yeah, yeah, I think that's important, is to do that. I think, sometimes individuals will talk to parents alone, they'll talk to the siblings alone, or they'll talk to the parents alone initially. It all depends on the circumstances. And that's, and I tell anybody, just trust your instincts because you're there in the moment and you know what's going to work best. And as and there's no one one path or one right or wrong way to address it. So it's whatever works. And I would trust that expertise.
And we're getting a lot of thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And I'll echo that. This has been wonderful to take your own experience and grief and turn it around to help others.
No, thank
So
you,
at
Kelly.
this
And thank
time,
you.
I will just thank you once again for joining us, everyone. Dave, do you have any parting words for us?
Um, just thank you for being such a great audience. Thank you for your great comments and just again know that you have a big fan in Oneida County for all that you do for families. And I'm one of your biggest supporters. So you guys do great work, and I'm blessed to have some great funeral directors that have graced my path. And it's just been fun. It's been fun, and I look forward to maybe someday down the road doing another workshop with you all.
Absolutely. We would love that. Can you just put the screen back up with your contact information for us?
Yes, I can. Let me just do this if I can. Let me see if I can. Okay, there we go. I had to just get out of here. Here's my contact information. What I didn't do is put my phone number up, um, but I can, I mean, I can. That's my contact information. It's bootsyandangel@gmail.com. That's my personal website if you want to know more about, about me and about, the work. The bootsyandangel.com. By the way, that was named Bootsy and Angel are my daughter Janine's two cats, and so I named the website after Janine's two beloved cats. So that's where that came from. And my phone number, and I know Kelly, you have it, but I'll just throw it out here. It's my cell phone. It's 315-269-4522. In fact, I might be able to type it right up here. Do we have time to do that quick?
Absolutely. We have as much time as we need.
Okay, there you go. So there's my phone number, and you can take that down. Chances are I won't have you in my contact list, so it'll go right to voicemail because that's how I have my phone programmed. But if you leave me a message, I'll get right back to you. Plus, any funeral director who calls me is on my VIP list. I will call you back within that day. And I usually return phone calls within 24 hours, but the funeral director needs to get in touch with me. I usually know it's relatively urgent and is urgent. I'll get right back to you within that day.
Great. Well,
So
thank
that's
you so
my
much again, Dave. We so much appreciate this. And everyone who's on the call, just please give us some time to get your CEU posted to your portal. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to call us, or if you have questions for Dave, feel free to reach out. I hope everyone has a great
absolutely.
rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, everybody, for attending and for listening and for your great comments. And I hope we can do this again sometime.
Yes, I hope so too. Thank you, everyone.